This is the Jabberjaw Podcast Network. Visit jabberjawmedia.com for more shows like this one.
They say every good hero needs a theme song. That's my theme song. This is the X-Man. I am your X-Man, Doc Coyle. Thanks for tuning in, downloading, listening on SoundCloud, wherever you check out podcasts. I really do appreciate it. You know, I've had some people come up to me on the streets. No, I'm just kidding. I don't hang out in the streets anymore. I mean in upstanding venues and establishments of the greater Los Angeles area. People reached out to me and said they've been enjoying the show, which is awesome. Our last episode with my buddy Jay Andrew Zalucky got a really great response, which was cool because, you know, I was worried maybe not having some name guy from a band or something, maybe an episode like that wouldn't resonate, but it did. It showed that you guys actually are kind of interested in examining some subject matter, talking to people with a little more educational background and knowledge. So that informs me. It's good to hear. So maybe I'll kind of do some episodes that are a little more topic based. But no, I'm doing good. I'm busy as all hell. I have too many things going on. There's definitely not enough time in the day. But you know, I'm trying to fit these shows in and get them out as often as possible. It's not always easy, to be honest. But yeah, we have a great show for you. Mr. Mark Hunter, the ex-singer from the band Chimera, will be coming on a little bit later in the show. But before that, we're going to get into a little bit of business. If you guys want to support the X-Man show, I have a very easy way for you to do that. Everyone uses Amazon.com. So if you want to support this show, you can go to my personal portal to Amazon and purchase what you would normally do otherwise. It would be www.coyle.net/Amazon, or go to .coyle.net and just tap on the Amazon button and just order like you would normally would. That will help the show. I would appreciate it. We also too, we're looking for other sponsors, bands. If you want to play a song, we've done that a bunch of times and actually displayed some amazing talent out there. So yeah, hit me up on social media. You can find me at Doc Coyle, DOCCOYLE, on Twitter, Instagram. You can find me on the Facebooks. I'm everywhere, you know, just all up in your feed, talking shit. And I should also just give you a reminder to please go over to iTunes and leave a comment and a rating. It matters so much for the show. That stuff kind of slowed down for a little bit. I don't like that, all right? Next time I see you in person and you tell me how good the show is and you didn't give me an iTunes comment, I'm going to punch you square in the chest and then maybe take some money out your wallet. I mean, I'm not gonna do that. But you know what I'm saying? I'll give you a stern look. You know, maybe give you one of them greasy, overly strong Donald Trump handshakes and make it real uncomfortable. And maybe do a little close talking, breathe on your face, or maybe spit while I talk on your eye, and maybe look at your girlfriend a little too long. You know, and just make it uncomfortable for everyone. You see, guys? See what happens when there's no comments? I don't know what to do with myself. Anyway, before we get into our discussion with my old friend, Mark Hunter, I actually want to play a song. So, your man, Doc Coyle, the X-Man, I co-wrote a song on the new Body Count album. Yes, the Body Count with the man, the legend, Ice-T. This is crazy for me, you know, being a musician, being someone who lives in America and has had someone like Ice-T be kind of part of your life. You know, it's just like a figure there. You know, New Jack City, that's all time for me. You know what I'm saying? I want to shoot you so bad, my dick is hard. All right. That's from New Jack City. If you ain't seen New Jack City, I can't help you. But anyway, and then Body Count being a black heavy metal band, and God forbid that kind of being our big part of our identity as well, you feel kind of connected to those musicians. They really opened up a lot of doors for us. So I had someone on Twitter ask, I believe it was Mr. Gene Snodgrass, a friend on Twitter, asked how that came about. So essentially I was approached by Mr. Mike Gitter from Century Media Records, who was a guest on this show, and they were looking for some help, some submissions on tracks. And so essentially what I did was at home, I listened to the first Body Count record, and then I listened to the most recent Body Count record. And then I tried to write something that was kind of somewhere in the middle between that, kind of bridge the old and the new. And so I wrote an entire track instrumentally, sent it to them, and had no idea what was going to happen. And then eventually, maybe 3 or 4 months later, I got an email and there was the song. And if you were to kind of A/B what I originally sent them and then what kind of made it to the final cut, it's really interesting because I wrote a whole very like hardcore style, chunky, almost thrashy kind of bridge. And they took all that out and they kind of just used my main guitar melody and then what ultimately became the chorus heavy machine gun riff, which is, by the way, I haven't even mentioned the song. The song is called This Is Why We Ride, and it's track 3 on the new Body Count record entitled Bloodlust. And that actually came out this past Friday, March 31st. So I'm going to play the song, but I hope you guys really like it. It's pretty insane to sit in your room and write some riffs and some parts, and the next thing you know, Ice-T is dropping verses on them. That's pretty dope. So I want to thank them. I want to thank everyone in the band Body Count. I want to thank Ice-T, who personally reached out to me on Twitter when all the kind of hype started building up. That's pretty amazing. I'm still kind of blown away by that. And I definitely want to thank Mike Gitter at Century Media for having me involved. So I'm going to play this song. It's called This Is Why We Ride. Enjoy it. And right after that, our interview with Mark Hunter from the band Chimera, the ex-singer from the band Chimera, will be coming right after that. Check it out.
People always want to know the reason for what they consider senseless violence in the hood. I'ma break it down for you. This is why we ride. And this is why we ride. And this is why we ride. I gotta say this clear, I gotta say this loud. I should This argument goes from little drama to big drama. Next thing you know, somebody's dead. I don't think you can understand. If you've never been in the streets and held your best friend in your arms, your child in your arms, and watched him breathe their last breath, cause somebody shot him dead in the streets. You ain't thinking about calling the police. You want revenge, and you want it now. I gotta be honest with you. If somebody were to kill me, shoot me right now, my last words wouldn't be peace. It'd be get those motherfuckers. This song is dedicated to all of you who have lost somebody to street violence.
Welcome to the X-Man show.
Hell yeah.
Welcome to the X-Man Club.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been a while now. I had the fortune of seeing you twice. Like I saw you in Denver and then I saw you in LA like maybe a week before the band broke up. So it was obviously a super left field. Like I thought seemed like you guys were doing great before that happened. At least the show, and I saw a show in Philly, I think not too long, and it was like at the TLA. It was like a Tuesday. It was fucking packed. I'm like, man, these guys are doing great. So, I don't have the perspective that you have of what was going on day to day. So it definitely came as a big surprise to me.
It came as a surprise to me. Of course, the initial blow, you can't just be like, oh, I was expecting that to happen. But just from my perspective, walking into the last tour, you could sense that honeymoon vibe was over, as they say. And the tour itself, some nights were hit or miss, and some nights that were miss were pretty miss and pretty hard to deal with.
You could feel the tension.
I think, yeah, and I think that, I mean, just to be completely candid, like no one was making any money on that tour. That last one was really bad with the finances. And so when Chimera 1.0 ends and 2.0 starts, the name didn't retain the same type of marquee value.
Yeah.
Not to mention metal in itself. Concerts were in this time period, maybe 2013, 14, still kind of hit or miss with promoters taking a chance. So not many of them were as willing to take a chance on this new version financially. So our guarantees dropped radically and just made things much harder. I mean, the last tour, in our heyday, of course, we're rolling in some sweet buses with a crew. On the last day, I'm driving the bandwagon 8 or 9 hours and then getting off and playing a show with like one crew guy.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a hit. And that just sort of thing wears on you. It wears on the spirits. It wears on the friendships. Who knows what else could be thrown into the mix. But I was grateful it ended because honestly, it was just like, it felt like it was dying a slow death and it was something I couldn't escape from by that point.
Yeah. I listen.
But
I can
some of the
I can
shows were
identify with
great,
that.
you know. Right, I figured you could, but like again, like when you see us on a good night, yeah, it's because the show might be packed and you know the band's playing well, and we never had a bad time playing. You know, we always performed pretty well together. But just some of those shows, man, when you're like, it's just out of gas. You know, that was our term for it. Like someone called the BP truck. This show's out of gas.
Well, I mean, one thing I could say about that tour lineup, I don't think that did you any favors. I think you guys were basically pulling all the weight, and there wasn't no disrespect to the bands that were on the bill, but they were definitely younger, more developing bands. And when you get 3 or 4 bands kind of in that similar boat, as opposed to having a tier where you have like, all right, we have one kind of newbie band, then one kind of mid-level building band, and then a true main support or like a co-bill, and and that's listen, the biggest bands get the biggest bands to support them, and when the band starts struggling, because I know we went through this, then all of a sudden you can't put together the type of headline package that you want to, because maybe your band has fallen off a little bit. So then now those bands don't want to open up for you. And then all of a sudden now you're in this situation where it's like, all right, well, we got to go on tour, but maybe we're going to have a lineup that's not as, as solid as we'd like. So I definitely understand that.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I also think that there's a little bit to do with, man, I just lost my train of thought. Shit, I hate when that happens.
It's all good.
You mentioned that the line of suffering because of the bands falling off, but there's also, man, I lost it.
Oh, it's all right. Well, you know what? Here's what we're gonna do. I feel like we actually got a little ahead of ourselves, because I actually wanted to kind of go back to kind of the beginning. Well, I want to go back to the beginning of the band, and one of the great things about this show is getting to talk to people like you guys I've known for a really long time. So the first, and I love like kind of, even me remembering like, oh, I remember that. Like, so the first time I ever saw you guys was actually at New England Metal Fest. I believe it was.
Stop. I remember it. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I remember it. I knew it would happen, and this is because it is because of what you just said right there. On your previous podcast with the New Wave of American Heavy Metal podcast that I just listened to, you mentioned that God Forbid had a hard time finding its place within a scene, because you guys, and just like us, we reached some pretty far horizons in terms of bands and genres we would combine with. Like one tour we might go out with Hatebreed, or one tour we might go out with Danzig. Another Fear Factory might play a show with Soulfly. We were very spread out, but also didn't feel like we fit in a lot of times. Like right when we come out with Lamb of God, it's like, why is this new metal band here with Lamb of God? And right the first time we toured with them, so we kind of, because we went from kind of that new metalish sound in the beginning and then into this newer style that we were more or less known for throughout, we kind of just didn't fit in always. And I felt that had a little bit to do with putting our packages together. It was like, well, who's quote unquote smaller than us? And it's usually just baby bands or, and then again, like you said, like a package. And if you want the package to be good, it's like, well, it's going to be a co-headliner, because this band is technically the same size as you. So
I like co-headlines, man.
There's no problem with it, but it never really felt like we ever we were like the world's greatest opening act. It was like you put us in front of another band, we would, do really well and bring in a lot of fans. But we go out and headline, it's like, where is everybody?
Yeah. Well,
not always.
No, listen. I've seen you guys. We toured you guys headlining, and you guys would kill it. I mean, I know definitely overseas, you guys, had some really great tours as a headliner. And I saw some of that stuff up close. It's tough though, man. But no, I'm gonna. Despite what you said, I'm gonna go back to the beginning. I got some questions.
Back to the beginning.
Doc Cole's got some questions.
Lost that thought.
But I wanted to I wanted to like tell a story about when I first saw you guys. So I saw you guys at New England Metal Fest, and I believe the year was 2000. All right,
Yeah.
So this is I didn't know you guys, and we played at that year. They had a third stage, so I think we played the third stage. It was literally in a venue around the corner from the Palladium. So this is the Worcester
I remember
Palladium.
that.
And so we played the third stage. Killswitch played the third stage, and I think Hatebreed was going to do a secret show on the third stage, and then it got moved, and they played the second stage and ended up getting into a fist
The
fight
riot.
on stage
Yeah.
with Anal Cunt. But I remember
Right.
seeing you guys and being like, "Oh man, this is like kind of new metal, but it was so heavy. Like, but it sounded like a band that would be in our scene. Like it was like so I like even though you guys were, I guess, viewed at as being this new metal band or coming out of that scene, to me it still sounded like a new metal slash metalcore, or like at least the scene we were coming from, hybrid. Like it wasn't just a straight new metal band. Like you could tell that you guys were listening to the Hate Breeds of the world, and the really heavier bands that it was filtering in, and death metal stuff you could hear in there, and so that was kind of crazy. It's like, damn, this is a really, and I remember people were really feeling it. I was like, damn, this band's really, really, really cool. And then somehow we got in touch and we were talking online, and then you came to see us on our first tour ever in
Yeah.
when we
All
played.
Out War
Yeah.
at the Euclid. The Flying Machine.
Yep. And with Shadows Fall and All Out War, and then we hung out, and then kind of stayed in touch. That's how it was for a while. I feel like we would like get in touch with like-minded bands and just be homies, and then eventually all of us started things started happening for us. But so you guys got, was it the Farm Club thing that actually got the label interest and all that stuff for you guys, or was that stuff
Yes.
already going
Yeah.
on?
That was something that sort of put it kind of assured we would get signed. I think we had a little bit of label interest. When we released our EP, it did well on WSOU, and it did well on the internet. And this was kind of in the era of bloggers are starting to become a thing, and reviews online were starting to become a thing. So all of those were positive and like kind of hyped us up, probably overhyped us, and it definitely filled label's expectations pretty high. So, but when we hit Farm Club, the goal was to bring Roadrunner out to that because they were already kind of looking at us.
Yeah.
So when we went to film, it would have been really easy. The guy that was looking at us his name was Kevin Estrada. It would have been very easy for Kevin to come out because he was in the LA office. He didn't make it that night, but just the fact that we were kind of on that, it was like, man, these guys are doing some pretty cool things. We should probably take it seriously. And then when we went out on tour with Spineshank, that's when we started seeing like offers come in.
So
so
you got on a tour with Spineshank when you were unsigned?
Yeah, and the funny way that happened was we had the same manager, and they were playing Toledo and Cleveland. So of course we would be a good asset to those shows, and with the same management, it makes sense. So just playing that first time, we kind of felt that we had this kinship with Spineshank because we came from the same farm, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I just flat out asked the guitarist, Mikey, I'm like, hey, can we follow you around and do the rest of this tour with you? So they had about 2.5, 3 weeks of dates left.
So you weren't even on the tour, you just jumped on?
Literally jumped on and jumped in cars, and we did it in like four guys, or four, maybe even five, rode in a Ford Taurus. That's when we played those shows. It was like Boiler Room was on the tour, Nonpoint. Was
Rob Cangiano in Boiler Room?
Yes, he was.
Wow.
And so we kind of just jumped on. Mikey was like, yeah, fuck it, come on in, join this. If you've ever met Mike Sarkeesian from Spineshank, you just know he's a really easygoing, fun guy. He likes to have fun. And he was just like, yeah, come on. I think he felt he had the balls. His band was doing really well, and they kind of could call any kind of shots they wanted.
I feel like
So
that's
we
only
got paid
something that could
50.
have happened then. Like I feel like now if you
Perhaps,
did
yeah.
that, like everything's like Live Nation and it's like very
Right.
regimented and very like there's contracts. There's this band isn't on the contract. We have a local bit like I feel like people would flip out if you did something like that today.
It kind of helped because we did have we'd like just signed up with a booking agent. We were only going to get paid $50 a night. It wasn't really like, we asked for like $50 and some beer and towels or water and towels, whatever it would have been. But a lot of promoters were really cool. They were like, man, this band's bringing in a lot of people. Like they could tell, even though we were opening the show, that we had fans there and we're making fans. So a lot of them treated us like really cool, like make sure we got a rider and shit like that.
That's awesome, man. So,
But yeah, once that happened, that tour, like Nonpoint was signed to MCA, and they started like telling their label reps like there was a lot going on with us, and then the Roadrunner kind of caught wind that now more labels were interested in us, and it became a sort of a mini bidding war.
yeah. So now, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what little I've heard from you guys talk, and maybe some people in the industry, you guys kind of got one of the last big, kind of major label deals. I guess I would characterize it as something that really the last wave of kind of the new metal bands that were getting bigger deals, or even like bands that were kind of almost in that radio rock realm. The Alien Ant Farms of the world and things like that, where you could come in and get a 6-7 figure deal out the gate. Like another band, like 40 Below Summer was a band that got a pretty big deal out the gate, and I think El Nino got a pretty big deal out the gate. And those things are essentially non-existent anymore. Would I be wrong in characterizing your guys' deal like that?
No, we definitely got a quote unquote major label deal.
Yeah.
From Roadrunner. They offered us initially a more or less a baby band deal, which is kind of their standard practice. But because of the bidding war stuff going on, we were able to kind of put the chips towards our side.
Now, because of that, were there just the expectations like super high?
Yeah, they were through the roof. Yeah, but the thing that sucked was, I mean, we had a couple of things going against us. They also sold their company. They sold their company as like our record was scheduled and slated to come out
with the Warner deal. Or this?
I believe it was Island.
Oh yeah, time. No. Did they sell it or was it like a merger?
Merger.
Yeah,
that's what it was. All this was going on. The merger was going on, and that delayed our album. Our album had leaked. We were kind of touring way too early, spending a lot of money. Then the album leaked, and people didn't really like it. So we kind of had quite a few things against us. So we spent a lot of money up front and weren't able to make the kind of return they needed. And we were subsequently kind of left to do our thing once we kind of did our initial touring. We got some big tours right off the gate, like with Slayer and whatnot. But after that, it was really hard pressed for us to get tour support. We weren't able to go to Europe on our first album because we just kind of blew through everything.
So
with a great album release.
But so there were these outward expectations, but what about like within the band? Like, were you guys? Did you guys feel like, man, we're gonna be the next Mudvayne?
Yeah, of course. We definitely had high expectations, high aspirations, and we definitely felt what it feels like to have those fall flat on your face trying to achieve them and not get them.
Do you think those expectations were like not? Do you feel like you were kind of being full of yourselves, or wasn't accurate to the reality? Like did you guys feel like that? Like, because the thing is, I remember when we first like started doing shows with you guys, and I remembered just how organized you guys were, and that it seemed like you guys thought about your band like a business. And like I remember we were like everything that happened on a professional level where the band moved forward almost was like an accident, whereas like you guys was like, yes, we're like I said, this is not because you said this. This is more me just kind of reading from the outside looking in. It was like, yes, like these are our fans. And I remember like seeing Chris like being on the computer and like working, like, you know, dealing with like the street team and like really like, you know, you guys were like, no, this is our career. And you took it really seriously. And, you know, and there was this, like I said, this expectation of a professional approach, you know, that in a way at the time I really looked up to, where I was like, damn, man, like we need to get our shit together. These guys are, you know, they're making shit happen, you know, whereas us, we kind of like stumbled and, you know, and Forrest Gumped our way into, you know, a music career, you know, so it was just really kind of interesting. And I wondered just that, like, when you go in kind of like, all right, this is a business and we're going to be like, and you kind of have a plan, and then all of a sudden it doesn't go where you exactly thought, but it's only because of the expectations, right? Like if you guys had no expectations and then you look, you all of a sudden you're on tour with Slayer, and even we did that tour with you guys in '02 with 36 Crazy Fists, and they weren't like huge shows, but they also weren't terrible shows. It wasn't like we were playing in front of nobody. Like you guys did have fans and people gave a shit about the band. Hell, we did a show at Birch Hill and we headlined because we're like, yeah, we're from Jersey, we're killing here. And like half the place cleared out after you guys played. So there was definitively, I think, something building, but I think it's just there was expectation that it's going to happen in one record or one touring cycle instead of looking at the long term, you know?
Especially when that was kind of too as well the era when like people were really starting to see some impressive first week sales, and like people started paying attention to that. Like that's a thing now that we all have to worry about. And like a band like Linkin Park came out of the gate and they were just like, whoa, that's a lot of sales first week. And I think we sold like 4,000. They sold like 48,000.
Well, I mean,
something like that. But
yes, that album only sold 12
at,
million copies, dude. I mean, it's
sure,
one of the
yeah. At the time, Roadrunner were expecting us to be like a Slipknot.
Yeah.
Which was not even the same ballpark at that time.
Well, but that's also, you know, that's for our genre, we get one of those bands a decade, basically. It's like Pantera, then it's Slipknot, you know, and then, you know, then Five Finger, you know, it took really till Five Finger Death Punch before you had another band that was getting gold, platinum records, playing arenas. You know, Avenged Sevenfold, I don't really put in there. They're probably a little more on the mainstream side of things, but in terms of heavy bands, it just, you know, but I don't know. It's just, it puts at the forefront how much expectations characterize what is success or not success. You know, and also like something with me, like over the years, because after a while I started having expectations and having those expectations not met and being unhappy. And then as I kind of got into my 30s and things started dwindling down, it was just like, oh, to be in this, to do this shit, you have to be process oriented, not results oriented, because there's so little you can control, right? You can go and work and make the best album you can make, and you can put on the best performance, but you can't make people like it, you know?
No, yeah, obviously not. There's a lot that you said there. I think it's really cool that you noticed that we did run it like a business, because we absolutely did, but we also fumbled all over ourselves. We didn't know shit about business, which is what's interesting.
How
and
would
now
you? You're like 20 years old.
Exactly. Now that I'm out of the band and I'm more quote unquote in a corporate world, I look at I see daily now all the mistakes that the band made in terms of quote unquote business. But we were business in the sense of like taking our shit absolutely serious, from like practicing to just the way we did the books and took care of our merchandise. And but of course, the more you go through it, you learn, and we learn from a lot of bands too. And things I like to learn from bands is just, I was all about the stage setup and how they did their production. And I think that my expectations that would, I guess, defeat me were when we weren't able to put on the type of show that maybe I thought we were at a level at to put on, because we were either restricted or financially restricted, or maybe we were second of five on a package. And I just am the type of person that, like, yeah, it's cool to go see a band, But if the show isn't progressing with the sound and the albums, then I guess I didn't think it was as great, but that's just my own insecurity, I suppose, because some people are, look at Rage Against the Machine. Like, I'd be happy to see them, and all they do is amps but I guess I love that crazy production and always wanted to do more with that. So my expectations were more along those lines of like being able to put on a great show for the fans and a lot of cool production stuff.
Well, I think a lot of that stuff, I can go either way, and I think it depends on the band, and I also think it depends on, I think I have that other element of, some of the best shows I've ever seen have been no production. I saw At the Drive-In play in a firehouse. I saw, I remember Andrew WK headlined this thing called Furnace Fest in 2002, and I think the production literally was just the lights. They actually turned the stage lights on because it was like a hardcore fest, so no one had anything. And it was just the craziest show I've ever been to. Like, sometimes, bands putting on great shows in spite of not having, a great light show or having, crazy scrims or whatever. Like, sometimes, or like, I think the thing is now you'll see bands where they'll have tracks, and then somehow their tracks don't work. And they'll like cancel the show, yeah. Or they'll, they without the tracks, they're kind of like once you rely, like if you're relying on the lights or if you're relying on the tracks, then maybe it's like, all right, maybe some of the other elements aren't working as well as they need to,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I love a show with minimal production. I love a show with big production. Nine Inch Nails, a great example of that. You could go see them and sometimes they'll strip down the production to the bare minimum compared to some of these higher arena productions. And but yeah, like you said, some of these bands that'll play like festivals and stuff. And yeah, you have to absolutely be able to bring it and not rely on anything but your instrument and your abilities. But yeah, I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. Like,
I think I always admired that you guys held that stuff to a high standard. I remember, I think it was Rob, or maybe you talking about it, like saying how the reason why you guys made that a priority was like the KISS thing. Like, you basically have to act like a big band if you want to become a big band. Act as if.
Yeah, that was from the beginning. Our first show, we played the same venue I saw you guys at with All Out War. That was our very first concert. We opened for Napalm Death and Today Is the Day. And we brought like crew. they were good for nothing, but it's like, no. We got to have passes.
They have Chimera work shirts with their names on
it? Not yet. But yeah, there is something to be said, at least in that era, about perception. I don't know that it's the same anymore. I think I'm so out of the loop now. Couldn't even tell you the last concert I went to, but there's definitely an era too. Even this goes back to talking with record labels and getting signed. It's that perception we were able to create a little bit with the early stages of the internet, where now so much it's not as easy to
the mystique.
Have any sort of mystique whatsoever. Correct.
Yeah. No, I definitely hear that, but I thought it definitely served you guys well, and it probably did advance the because I think there's that element of being like a local band and a national band, and half of not being, is being a national band is not acting like a local band. Right. It's like just the psychology of it, of like, no, we're legit, motherfucker. We're here. We're the real deal. So
we got our own guitar tech,
dude.
Dude can't figure out that the guitar is not working because he has to hit the power button on.
It's hard work, man. It's hard work.
It is.
So things really switched for you guys when Impossibility of Reason came out. And this is, I think, me speaking as objectively as possible, I still think it's probably the album that you guys made that had the most impact. And if you were to say this is the definitive work of a band, or say, hey, if I listen to Chimera, what album should I listen to? That's the one I would give. I still think there's something special about that album. It just sounds alive, and the production is perfect, and the way you guys, the order of the songs, it's just like it's a band hitting their moment. when you in between those records where you kind of were more in the new metal sound, and then you kind of it still sounds like the same band, but obviously you kind of went in more thrashy, kind of almost a lot of Pantera influence on there. Um, like what was going on? Like did you feel like that was more the natural sound, or did it feel like, all right, well, this other, Shadows Fall, Lamb of God, these bands are kind of taking off, but maybe we should do that? Was it more calculated?
It was definitely more calculated. There was a few things I can remember just from my perspective that'll point to the change in sound. One was that our amps just didn't sound good with 7 strings back then, and it we couldn't get a good mix in our monitors as a young opening band, and a lot of times the riffs would get washed out. And I remember that being a complaint for Rob, is the tone just wasn't cutting through back then. I mean, nowadays, like 7 strings cut through. Like, we had these like Yamaha digital heads we were using because they gave them to us for free.
I remember.
And you remember all that? And then we didn't use cabinets because like we saw Meshuggah and they were like, oh, they're not using cabinets. Think about how much trailer space we'll save. Anyway, I digress. But that was one factor, was just trying to get a better tone. Another factor was being misunderstood. A lot of the negative reviews that I mentioned with our first album were pinning us as a new metal band. And while, yes, we liked Korn and Slipknot, and some of us liked Limp Bizkit and all these new metal bands, like, we loved Metallica, Pantera, Slayer. We were way more rooted in that scene. And once we got Matt into the band from Hagar, switching from Hagar, his influences.
Jason Hager, miss you.
Absolutely.
Love that dude.
Jason was more into some of the newer metal sounds of the time, where DeVries was a lot more rooted in hardcore and earlier death metal, some of the like real old school Napalm Death. So our influences kind of changed, and then playing with bands that were a little bit more along our lines didn't kind of happen until afterwards. Like, you guys definitely had a lot more thrash than most of the bands that we toured with in 2001, 2002. I'd say that besides Slayer and maybe you guys, I can't think of anyone else who wasn't maybe new metal.
Yeah.
So we were kind of in the new metal scene, but we were like, man, we crush in this scene because we're so heavy compared to the new metal bands, and we have a lot more technical prowess than any of these new metal bands that we were jamming with most of the time. But in terms of like, we were Dead Inside. We had this middle part that was just blatant Meshuggah ripoff, and that wasn't too common in the new metal scene at that point. So stuff like that, this technical shit. But yeah, I'd say it's more our roots were the classics, and we wanted to bring that out more so.
But did you see though, like, I think, because what was going on at that time was, I think the writing was on the wall as well, that new metal was kind of falling out, kind of falling out of favor.
We didn't like that term applied to us. We liked the music, but we definitely started feeling the stigma of what that term meant.
It was passe and kind of corny. And
yeah, it just wasn't what we were trying to convey. And I'd say the biggest influence in like image would be like definitely seeing more like the older school style metal bands and like missing that. I remember seeing Lamb of God the first time. I'm like, man, this is what I'm fucking talking about. Like, these guys, it was at that SOU Fest.
Yeah.
I remember pointing to somebody, I'm like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, these guys are doing it right. Like, and this was very early stages of Lamb of God, but they had the hair, they had the strobe lights. I'm like, this is what metal is, man. Like, I was missing that from the new metal scene. And we were like adamant about trying to bring that back. I remember our manager was like mad because we were going to just kind of start growing our hair out and like dressing more like metal dudes. And like, it's like, man, you guys look like Linkin Park, but you sound like, way heavier. I don't remember what band he used, but we didn't want to look like Linkin Park, I guess, I mean, some of us did. I remember the photo shoot for Impossibility. Reason We yelled at Jim because he brought like a polo sweater. It's like, what the fuck you doing?
we're done with that, man.
Exactly. Didn't you get the memo? We've changed our style.
We've moved on. So Impossibility comes out, and I think right around that time that we toured you guys again. And that was the Slipknot Fear Factory, the Jägermeister tour.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And clearly, at that time, things had changed. Like all of a sudden, I think you guys were kind of a band of the moment. Where things were really happening. I think you'd done Ozfest. Then we did the tour with you guys in the UK with Killswitch. You guys were, I think there were shows on there where you guys, did even better than Killswitch. Like you were really, really killing it. I mean, did you guys all of a sudden the expectations got, kind of, put down on the previous record? Now all of a sudden, did the expectations get risen back to a bigger level now that you saw that the success with Impossibility?
I think one thing that we always had going against us as a band is we never really noticed when the good stuff was happening, and we almost felt like
you can never
like
take time to smell. You can never take time to smell the roses.
Nothing's ever good enough, or you're not smelling the roses. It's like one or the other.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes our ambition was just absolutely through the roof, and
that's
to
kind
our
of
own
sad.
fault.
That kind of bums me out, man. Because I saw it, and I never, I think there's this thing, especially with young bands, like you said, I think it's probably the same mentality for people that become obsessed with wealth or banging all the hot chicks. Like there is no amount that will ever satisfy you, because there's always going to be more money to make. There's always going to be a hotter lady to bang. And when it comes to success, especially with bands, is that what do? We compare ourselves to the next ring on the ladder, and and I think what we've noticed in a lot of ways, the bands that weren't looking up and were kind of happy in their own skin were the ones that ended up being having a little more success long term. And I look at bands like Every Time I Die, Darkest Hour, where they, even though there was ambition, they were kind of like, no, we're just gonna stay in our lane. We're gonna stay in the van. We're gonna, and I look at that, and I wonder, I think if perhaps we took on a little more of those expectation and ambition as the band went on for us, but so I can definitely identify with that.
It was weird. It wasn't something like that was almost conscious where you're like sick about it, like quote unquote keeping up with the Kardashians or keeping up with the Joneses back then. But there's this thing that like demoralizes your success, that we're in an industry that the one-upping is very much in your face. So it's like you might think you're equal with like a certain band, and then you find out you're on the same label, maybe similar kind of sales, and then you're like, how's that band making like $5,000 more a night? And then you're like, well, what the hell? What are we doing wrong? And you start analyzing it, and then it's like, well, maybe we're not playing good enough, maybe the productions, but you're trying to consciously fix things that maybe aren't necessarily broken because you're hearing the success of people you're perceiving to be either your peers or maybe not even your peers. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what? Yeah, how's that band made what? And you don't even know now that if it's true or not. And I think we started as we got older to appreciate things much more so than at the height. I mean, at the height, we were just so hungry. That era was filled with hunger, like an unquenchable thirst. And I think that that's the type of emotion you are seeing, was like a band that we thought we were going to be something. We got shut down in that regard. But so now we were like, well, we kind of somehow just got another chance, so we're not going to let go of this, and let's just be as hungry as possible and as relentless as possible. And I don't think you can have time to smell the roses when that's going on.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, because, we were, lucky enough to tour with you guys, continually, like we did the tour with you and Arch Enemy, I think 2006.
Nevermore, yeah.
Well, Nevermore did the other leg.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a great tour. And just kind of, I remember that actually the really funny story from that tour was that was the day the last Tool album came out.
Okay.
And you went and actually, no, I can't remember if we bought it or if Chris somehow got like like he found a copy online or something. But I remember the beginning of Vicarious starts the ding, 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 like and the song. It's 5 seconds in, and you're like, "This is already the greatest album I've ever heard in my life."
That sounds like me. So weird that you mentioned that. I listened to that song this morning because I'm in the Tool mode because they're coming to my area finally for the first time in like I don't know how long. I bought tickets like a fan. I'm on Ticketmaster, like hitting refresh at the second they went on sale. And I'm so excited. Like I bought like when's the last time I bought concert tickets? I couldn't even tell you. Usually I'm just like, hey man, can I get into this show? So I feel really cool. I'm still just as big of a Tool fan today as I was 10 years ago.
Well, the great thing about that comment was it was exactly what I was thinking. It's like, yo, they're that, and guess what? Still haven't put a record out since that day. Which like think about it. Like that for me, that feels like 50 years ago. That doesn't even feel like.
It feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
I feel like I bought that across from the Norva.
Was that where it was? I don't even remember. I don't remember where we were.
The record store across from the Norva. There was that mall, remember, across from the Norva.
Yeah.
And we'd have to look it up to be sure. You could be right about Chris scoring a leak. He was very good at that sort of thing back then. But
internet man. Actually, I think on that same tour he had a leak of the End of Heartache Killswitch album. I remember hearing that for the first time. I think came from him. So if the feds are listening to this, Mark can probably give you his whereabouts for his pirating.
He never pirated them. It was people. They just mysteriously showed up on the bus on some blank disc.
Oh, sure, mysteriously. All right.
I think it was usually those record label A&Rs. I think I would point to them. They're
okay. All right. You say so. So no, but we got to tour a lot, during that time. So in a lot of ways, being kind of like you, being that guy who's interested in the business and and say, oh, how did they figure this out, and how are they doing? And you become kind of a student of career arcs, I guess, because you're trying to emulate that and figure out how you can make things happen. Actually, I remember like when you guys put out the self-titled. I remember you did the tour. I think it was 6 Feet Under was main support.
Yep. All That Remains. And that was at Irving Plaza, and you guys murdered it. Like, there was like 900 people there. Like, that was a fucking killer fucking... Like, how are you not smelling the roses then, motherfucker? Like, when you're, like, headlining... You want to know why? Is because I remember that night, as soon as we got off stage, and we felt we had... This is, again, these people that want to bring you down in the industry, like, when you're on those highs. And I remember being on a high that night because the show was great and we played really well. And man, it's not only hard to pack out New York City, but to get them to move is a whole nother part of the equation that people don't understand.
That might have been the best headline show I ever saw you guys play. It was incredible.
So that night comes out and someone from our record label basically said to me, like, well, we were going to put a lot more into the album, but, we didn't think that it was that catchy. The songs are kind of long. And it was basically telling us that they kind of glossed over our entire marketing campaign for that album and didn't believe in it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the fuck, man. So you kind of get in these zones of like, depression because you're like you don't really understand how to deal with a situation like that. You're like, and then how do you be cool on the bus, and like you don't want to bring everyone else's vibe down because everyone else is having a good time, but then it's like you just got this awful news from your record label, and of course you want to tell it to everyone else. But it affects everything.
But were you of the mind at that time that were you overvaluing record sales as opposed to like ticket sales and merch and kind of the stuff that was actually making you money?
I think at that point, the most important thing was record sales, because in my opinion, record sales determined your ability to bring in quote unquote marquee value, which is
Yeah.
going to then lead to merch.
SoundScan was the king.
At that era.
It would say what your guarantee was going to be, what, how likely it was you would get on a particular tour or festival and stuff.
Correct. So sales were everything, because exactly, if we could boast X amount of sales or have a really good first week, then our potential of getting on a better tour, which would then get us better guarantees and merch, those things that make us money, were likely to increase.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure that the self-titled was probably at that time, the biggest debut, right? I think you sold like 13 or 14,000 or something pretty big, right?
It was at the time. It was at the time, but it wasn't that we were even disappointed in it. It was the comment like, we could have done so much more had we believed in it.
Yeah.
It was like a big amount for us.
But was Roadrunner the type of label at that time where they would be listening to demos and would be, because Monty was still there, so was he like
absolutely, he had a hard time catching on from the start.
But you guys didn't. So if Monty was like, "Hey man, I'm digging what you guys are doing. It's cool, but I need a single. I need a Pure Hatred. I need a Power Trip," he would say that.
Not in those words so much, but it was definitely implied that would be. It's not that it would that he said that I want that sort of thing. It's more like this doesn't exist. All your songs are long. We got to chop it up. Like,
and you guys didn't want to compromise. You were like, no, this is our vision.
Well, the thing what we had to do is, we definitely had a vision that we were trying to achieve, but also, we kind of played ball. Like Nothing Remains, the video, we shortened the version so it could be for quote unquote MTV and video channels.
So that's one of the best songs you guys ever wrote. That song is incredible.
I was listening to it today, actually. I haven't heard any of our music in a long time, and I'm like, man, I should probably listen to something so I remember what. We're going to be talking about this stuff. I kind of have to get into character.
No, I want you to be you. I don't want you to be a character. The character.
No, you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Yeah, you got to put yourself back in that place. But it's no. But listen, I understand both angles of it. Because I think because we kind of were going through the same thing where bands like us and you guys and Killswitch, all these bands, we like kind of established this sound where we all kind of shared similar vibes, but we did our own thing. And then I think you guys were, you were, even though the perception might have been different, we're heady and we're, kind of, view ourselves as trying to inject some intellectualism into the music. And so we're like, all right, well, here's this thing we did, but how do we take it somewhere else? How do we go somewhere new? And sometimes in that, you can lose just the simplicity of the thing that was working, or the formula. And I think it's a tightrope because as an artist, you don't want to repeat yourself, but I think in hindsight, I can listen back to certain things. I'm like, man, maybe that was a little self-indulgent where I wasn't just, all right, whereas like a band like Hatebreed is like, nah, man, we know what's coming. This is what it is. Meat and potatoes, we're going to give you the goods. I think a band like Killswitch is like that. Like they kind of have their formula and that, like I said, no one does that denigrate them. Like I just think they know who they are and they'll deviate a little bit, but it's like, this is what we do. And I think you can put a band like Lamb of God in that thing where even though they go out and they try new things, there's that kind of that 80% of what it is that's, what you're going to get. And sometimes trying to find, new ways or be experimental or have we're all trying to make our Dark Side of the Moon or something. At the end of the day, it's about the hooks,
Sure. Yeah. There was a little too of that. I think that the simplicity of Impossibility of Reason worked really well, even though there's some stuff on there that might be a little bit more on the technical side. The brunt of it is pretty straightforward, whereas self-titled is a little more on the progressive side of things. And I can see how that would alienate some. Of course, while you're working on it, you think, well, we sound like the same band. We're just taking a different mission. But another thing I noticed too is that's weird about releasing albums is the fans seem to catch on. I don't know if this was the case for you.
A year
But
later.
it most certainly was for us. Like, yeah, the album after the fact.
Yeah. Well,
So,
yeah, because
you know,
it a lot of times you don't. I experienced that with every album. Like I thought Determination was a failure until we basically right before we put out Gone Forever, and then we did a tour with Atreyu, and all these people were like Determination fans, and then we did this headline tour with Walls of Jericho, and all of a sudden we were killing it on those songs. I'm like, where were these people when we were touring on the record? And it's and in a lot of ways, I think that's also that ambition thing of you're like a cat chasing the laser instead of being patient and kind of just because I think the patience of it is saying, guess what? We like what we're doing. We're not going to rely on other people to tell us what we're doing is good. And that's a kind of being a not being insecure thing, being secure about your music. And I think, us personally, maybe we allowed ourselves to be like, all right, well, people aren't feeling this, so let's do this. Or, and I think that's the thing, especially when you tour a lot, because you kind of you're getting immediate feedback on what you're doing.
right.
And
Absolutely.
It informs you,
Yeah, if we're standing up there noodling for 20 minutes, like the fans just don't care. But that sort of thing would kind of have an impact, but not so much. I think that a lot of times that like those types of parts happen in the magic, those rare moments when you're actually all in a studio writing versus writing at home where you're like, oh, let's throw this beat down part in here right here. And you kind of just imagine how the fans are going to react to it.
Yeah.
And like, you can almost foresee it, but we stopped jamming in the room together after self-titled. No, I should take that back. Resurrection, I think, was the last album we made in a room together. Well, but half of that was written on computers.
Well, it's kind of funny you say that because I was going through all the records today, and to me, because I felt like self-titled was like kind of a deviation, but like I said, it's kind of your thinking man's record. It's really dense. There's a lot going on. Love the way it fucking sounds. And then
that makes this incredible.
Yeah.
I heard it like I said, I heard it today. Like Colin Richardson's,
ridiculous. And then Resurrection to me was kind of a little more like return to the Impossibility kind of songs, a little more shorter, but really fucking catchy. And I think that record holds up really, really well. And then it's like after that, I think that's where it kind of started to lose me. Where like I went to listen to Infection, and it's like everything's very slow. It's like a very slow record where I'm like, where? Because we got all used to the fucking to the tempo. Like these motherfuckers start smoking all the weed. You can smoke some of the weed. You don't have to smoke all the weed. It's like
it was all the weed.
Yeah, it was all the weed. And then I started, I don't want to get too much into the,
into it.
Head Shrink the band, but at that point, because that's right around the time, between Infection and the next record where a lot of the original members started leaving. Was it a scenario where creatively the band kind of felt like it had kind of went through its bag of tricks and people weren't as connected to it anymore, or am I just hearing something that's not there?
Yeah, I never got that vibe. I do understand that. One tiny thing to agree with that, I wouldn't maybe even necessarily call it tiny, it is kind of major, but when that album and the way that album was written, The Infection, a good chunk of it, if 2/3, if not more, it was just Rob and I jamming in the back of our tour bus and writing everything, and we doing everything with like a drum machine and whatnot. So by the time it came to actually like, hey, Andals, like, here's the song. Can you just keep the drums the same way? Like, don't change them. We like them how they are.
Was he cool with that?
Yes and no. That's where I mean. There's a little bit of that like creative disappointment. We didn't really leave it to a position for Andals to be creative on that album and give, whereas Resurrection, he wrote a good majority of all of his stuff. And this album, we kind of liked what we wrote and didn't give much room for anything else. But other than that, no, we were all really proud of that album. It was a myriad of things that you could point at that lead to it. But I mean, ultimately, friendships tear apart is going to be the crux of it. Money is going to be the crux of it. And 2010, you're looking at a very interesting time in music. So it started to fall apart, and then we're kind of left with Age of Hell was, again, Rob and I making an album, but this time we weren't making it together. It was like Ben and I, the producer, are making it, and Rob kind of had demos and already lined up for it.
So in between, we had Jim.
Not as cohesive to other people because it seems maybe a little more one-sided than the rest of our albums.
Yeah. So in between that, though, Jim leaves, and Chris both, yeah. And what do you think was going on with those guys? It was just kind of, you think they were ready to move on to another chapter of their life, kind of thing?
Well, there was that. I mean, of course, all the things I mentioned, like personality clashes and stuff like that, the business getting to you and allowing business to get in the way of friendship. There's a huge aspect of that. Jim got married. He was looking to have children and settle down. At that time, he was the first one to mention leaving the band. And his desire for us was not to leave. His desire for us was to put the band on hold so he could kind of go and do those things and go home, make some money, work, live a normal life for a little bit, because we'd been going around the hamster wheel for such a long time. None of us really agreed with that. So he was like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah. In hindsight, do you think it might have been healthy for the band, maybe to like put a break? Maybe
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I actually wrote a blog a couple of years ago for the fans to kind of explain a little bit of my side of the story to help them understand it, other than just like a vague, mysterious comment that was left on the official Chimera site that was like, we're out of here, see ya. Kind of gave my explanation, and one of the parts I did mention was that in hindsight, it probably would have been a great idea, because we had been going around the hamster wheel so much, and we were just worried that it would kill our momentum. We had just gotten off Mayhem. It was very successful for us, and we're like, no, that's a terrible idea. We need to keep going. Right now, we got to kind of quote unquote strike while the iron's hot. We did that tour with Disturbed. We had a lot of things going for us at the time. So leaving was like the last, or putting the things on hold was the last thing on our mind. So when he left, Emil Wursler from Doth came in to replace him on bass, because when Matt DeVries had a baby, Emil filled in on guitar, so he knew all the songs already. And we were on tour with Doth, and that made just things really easy. So we played some shows, and it was like, the fans don't really care that Jim's not here. I mean, they love Jim, and that's not trying to be disrespectful, but there wasn't anybody coming up and being like, what happened? Where is this guy? Things look different. There was none of this. So I think that was kind of a bad thing that happened. I think there should be more fan backlash. Because what that signals to the band is that members are somewhat expendable in a way. And then when you start seeing that all these bands are changing lineups right around the same time, it's like, well, there's something in the water.
Yeah.
And we kind of became disappointed with Andals a little bit. I think it was something really dumb too. Like, guitar went out on a show, and we needed him to play like a drum solo to fill the void, because it was like embarrassing. We couldn't play for a minute, and he just didn't really want to do that. It wasn't his personality, and it was like, it pissed us off for some reason.
He'd want to do it, he want to do a drum solo.
Right, and it just kind of pissed us off. But if you know Andals, like, it shouldn't piss you off, because Arnold's never does drum solos. So why it pissed us off at that moment, looking back, I'll never know. But, we kind of said, I think he had a lot going on. He was getting married, and it just seemed like his playing and his attitude of wanting to be in the band weren't what we were hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
And when we brought this up to him, it was kind of a surprise to him and crushed his spirits a little bit. So it was like we wanted him to kind of shape up or ship out, and that kind of approach wasn't the best thing to do.
Yeah.
And
tough love wasn't working.
Yeah. Tough love is what we were doing, and he needed something different.
Yeah.
Which it backfired on us, and he left. And don't blame him. And Chris was a really good friend of his, and kind of saw how things were going, and it was getting a little more intense and less, a bunch of friends from Cleveland and having a good time. So he gracefully bowed out. And then we had to make an album, and that just, it went well, but it didn't go, 100% as well as it could have. So
yeah, well, to me, I think, like you said, with the thing with Jim, he wasn't really a writer, I'm going to presume, as much as some of the other guys in the band. And Arnold had already left, and you guys made a really good record without him. So I think the impact, obviously the personal impact is huge, but to me, the real dividing point was when Rob left, because his guitar playing style described so much of the band's identity, his lead guitar playing, all that stuff. Do you have any insights? I definitely want to get Rob on here to kind of give his side of the story, if you would like to. But do you have any insight on Rob's leaving the band?
Well, it was definitely unfortunate, and I don't disagree with you at all. I think that his leads are they're awesome. Like, there's really, that's such an overused word, but I really want to try to take a moment and like truly use the word how it's meant to be used when I say that. And my favorite kind of guitarists are the ones that put a lot of feel and soul into their leads, and like a David Gilmour, for example. Mm-hmm. I don't care where I'm at, you throw, and even if it Comfortably Numb, one of their top songs, radio, you hear it all the time, but that guitar solo, I heard a million times, it can still do something to me internally. Mm-hmm. And not many guitarists that I've come across in my listening to like have that impact on me, but Rob has that impact on me. And I look at his soulful style of playing very similar to how I feel and react from like a David Gilmour solo, which is very positive and heartfelt and emotional. The same with his riff writing. My favorite song that Chimera ever wrote, even though it's not like the full lineup, would be the song Powerless on The Age of Hell. And that's because it's probably the most personal song I ever wrote in terms of like dealing with some real life shit. But the riffs, like, I kind of like, married myself to them emotionally so much. And like, because it was like calling to me on like a spiritual level. So I agree with you. It was drastic. And I had no desire to quote unquote continue the band after that. But there was a funny little thing called a record deal hanging over my head that kind of forced me to think I might have to give this a different shot.
Mm-hmm. So, but you don't really want to kind of comment on Rob's
on his departure?
Yeah,
why he left?
Yeah.
Oh, that's for him to say. I think that, creatively, in terms of like business wise, we definitely reached a boiling point. And with all of the stress of the things that happened, and making Age of Hell was probably not as collaborative as it should have been. Mm-hmm. On my end. And definitely once he left the band, quote unquote, but had to tour with us, like, I wouldn't say that his life was very pleasant in the bus once we kind of knew he was out.
Yeah, so he had announced that he was going to be leaving, but he still did some touring.
He still did some touring because it was kind of the right thing to do. He left after the album was finished, but we had not really set to tour with it. So as you know, you can't really just go make an album for a label, take all their money and be like, we're not going to go tour on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can.
You can, but they might.
It's probably not a good look.
Yeah, and they want their money back sometimes.
Yeah.
So, Rob and Matt both did the solid of staying within the group to do as much touring commitments as possible. And, just a very like dark, regretful time all around. I think like you literally can say like you lose your mind sometimes when the stress is getting to you. And I can definitely say like I didn't treat people the best during those time frames and didn't understand what was happening. So you get stressed and maybe you don't have the right patience locked in or the right skill set to deal with some of these weird anomalies. Like, arguments in the past were easy to deal with. Once an economy changes and an industry goes upside down and a whole new scene comes up on you, you're like, whoa, these are some different problems. Now we got to worry about the internet and Twitter.
Yeah.
What? What happened to worrying about ripping off Metallica?
Yeah. Well, that was a point in the art. Like I wrote the article about, the whole kind of downfall of our bands, like literally, I think a day or two after you guys broke up. And one of the points I made was our genre was one of the was in the time frame where just the timing was rough because we existed before the internet and we existed after, but not early enough where we got to put out like 3 or 4 records on like Atlantic and buy houses or maybe you got a house. I never got a house, but anyway. But we didn't get the benefit of kind of the 80s 90s boom, but then we also got the kind of the downside of not having to learn on the fly how to exist in the social media, kind of the era where, like I said, where bands just sell less records and you have to figure out other ways of generating revenue, of promoting the band. It's just a different thing. So we kind of, and I think, and if you weren't huge, you don't have as much help. You have to do it more on your own. Whereas I imagine some of the bigger bands, they have, bigger management staffs and bigger record labels, and they can kind of outsource a lot of that activity, in another way. But anyway,
at the end of the day, no one's going to do it as good as you do it yourself, in my opinion. And to be successful on social media, it's almost a full-time job. And I got burned out on doing that sort of thing personally because, again, it's taking. I want to write music and perform music and not. I like Twitter and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, but that shouldn't be like the focus of the job. And dealing with managers and like a lot of record labels and industry changes, like all these things that like pile up on the quote unquote business side of things. You're right. A lot of bigger bands probably have a staff to deal with most of that. But another thing we always did from day one was we were always very hands-on because, in many ways you start seeing some of these early people on coming up on your career, bumbling your career.
Yeah.
You're like, wait a minute, I don't want anybody handling this shit because the last guy that was handled it didn't do it right. I guarantee the next guy's not going to do it right either.
Yeah.
So we almost wore the Superman cape a little too often.
Yeah, well, that's I think where the lack of trust comes in, where you've been burned a couple times. Listen, you can be the same way in relationships, right? You get cheated on a couple times, you're like, there's no one out there for me. I think
sure.
I think it could go both ways. Where I was always of the mind that the successful bands I had seen, like I said, even if that's a moderate, like to me, a moderate but consistent success in some ways is more impressive than kind of the flame that burns really bright. And the pattern I saw is a lot of those bands would usually work with the same core management, label, agent for 10, 15, 20 years. because they kind of know who they are and they understand and you just can't. I don't think you can do it all yourself unless you're just one of those super people. I'm super enough, but I'm not that super. And with God forbid, we were lucky to actually have a really good manager, even at the end of things, and I still think they did good work for the most part. So at this point, and then Matt eventually leaves, and so now you're kind of the last man standing, but it didn't happen all at once. It was very much one guy that gets replaced, so it's a kind of slow process. What did that feel like once Matt left, and you kind of looked around, and it's like, whoa, it's
horrible.
I'm the only remaining guy. It felt horrible.
Yeah, definitely horrible. As much as I liked the guys I would eventually line up with, I just knew going forward that any accomplishment is not shared in the same way that it ever would have been before. So, these are the guys for the most part you've come up with. And so when you reach a new height and you're sharing that with your brothers, that camaraderie, even if you are, throwing piss and vinegar at each other at the moment, you can still reach those heights with them. I kind of felt like I reached heights. I think you wrote something about that in one of your early articles too, like when you were leaving God forbid or something, you mentioned like something about like he kind of been there, done that. And there's this like feeling of that coming into play too. And
there's no mountains to climb really. You've played to 100,000 people. You've sold a bunch of records. You've been on the Billboard. You've met most of your heroes. So at that point, you're not doing it because it's like, I've been to Japan. I've been to Finland. Like you've kind of crossed all these markers off. So at that point, it's what are the reasons that I'm here? Am I here because I love it? Am I here because I think early on, you can legitimately go out and do it for years and not really make money, but the experience itself is so unique and special, and you understand. Like I understood that. I was like, I'll never get a chance to do these things again. I'm lucky. I might come home and I have $5 in my pocket, but I've seen more and done more than most of the people I know, and that's invaluable. And it's just I love the worldly experience of being a touring musician. I love that I can talk about being in Barcelona or talk about being in Australia and being there and listen, I have a minute understanding of that place, but I can speak with a worldly way of things because I've been there and I've done it, and I think that's incredible. But at a certain point you're like, I don't need to do these things. I'm here because I want to be here, and I think it gives you a different appreciation down the line.
Exactly. And that I struggled with that, a lot. I didn't want to necessarily keep it the same name, and then everyone kind of convinced me otherwise. And then just like, okay, well, why am I doing it? Am I doing it because I have to? Am I doing it because I love it? And I genuinely started to learn to love it. And writing the album with everybody, man, I can't complain about it. I like the record, and I liked recording it. I liked playing with everyone. I thought they were all amazing musicians, fun to be around, man. So that was some of the most laughs I've ever done on tour. But there's like, there's this deep emptiness inside that is like, this isn't Chimera at the end of the day. Like, I don't know these guys.
Yeah.
I don't know any of these guys. And I literally do not know them.
Who is this?
I don't know anything about them. Yeah, like, who is this dude? And
who is this woman? What is she in my house? This is not my car.
But I have such a deep respect and appreciation for all of them for coming in at a, that's a, hey, we're 5 guys that are going to pick up the pieces for some other 5 guys. Like, that's a lot on their plate. They had to learn an extensive catalog and do it justice. And, I can't complain about that. For the task that needed to be done, I think all of us put 110% into it and then some. But by the end, man, I was fucking burned.
Yeah. Listen,
So
I totally understand that. You know, me, definitely a piece of me went away when Dallas left the band, with God forbid.
right,
Because I'll go back and I'll look at footage, and that was the version, like that was got with same five guys for 12 years, you
yeah,
know. And I look at the bands that, and even though you said people didn't really notice or make a big stink about Jim leaving, I guarantee you the real fan, the people that had been there from the beginning, on some emotional, um, just understanding. I think it matters. I think it's much different for metal bands than it is like hardcore scene bands, because those bands tend to have a lot of
yeah,
turnover. But with
absolutely,
like it matters when Dave Lombardo isn't in Slayer, or when
100%.
when Jason Newsted leaves Metallica. Like you're you have this relationship. Obviously it's a one-way relationship. They don't know you, but you know them, and it factors into how you perceive it and how connected you are to it. And you guys are also one of those bands like where like with that first DVD you put out, where you really got to understand the personalities of the band, and that was one of the ways you connected to your fans, was that people knew you guys. It wasn't just the music. You were, they understood each personality, and I think that matters. I think it is special, and it goes to show you that those things that do uh, exist and build over the course of a decade or two, like that chemistry, it's a moment in time and it's special, and you can't always recreate it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't move forward, but it is a moment in
Yeah,
time.
100%. And just to reiterate, like, just because fans don't come up and say something, that's where I learned, from that as well. That doesn't mean that they don't feel that, like you said. And I mean, I might not say that this whole podcast you've had this giant booger hanging out of your nose because I'm a nice guy. I'm totally fucking with you. You don't.
Okay.
Made you look though.
Listen.
But you know what I mean? Like sometimes people are quote unquote polite, or they don't want to bring up something negative because they just want to talk about the good moments or good things that are happening right then and there. So my perception was off by thinking that like people not leaving was that impactful. It was absolutely the most impactful thing.
Yeah. How was your have you repaired or done any, like, are you still in touch or cool with the kind of the original lineup guys, or is there still some friction and distance?
Uh, Little distance. I mean, I definitely don't have anything against anybody, but it's not something where um, we've necessarily had enough time to be calling each other up, being like, "Hey, did you watch Ash vs. Evil Dead last weekend or whatever the fuck show's on that we're watching?"
Yeah.
Ash vs. Evil Dead was October. I'm really sorry. What's on right now? I have no idea. I'm back to watching Mystery Science
Girls
Theater.
is on, man. Girls. All right. So
Okay,
it's the
yeah.
last season.
So
Everyone's
we're not
watching.
calling each other about girls right at the moment, the show, but not all of us anyway. But there, I mean, um, I think time is important here, and just the realization of what we did, what we had, what we went through. You asked what something that felt like earlier. I used to say it was like going through 6 divorces, but in this case now I've gone through 12.
Wow.
And it's just like an ex-girlfriend. You have that one girlfriend where you're like, she's pretty cool, I'll put her on my Facebook, maybe comment on her picture with a new boyfriend because she's cool, I have nothing against her.
Yeah.
And there's that one girlfriend where you're like, that was pretty rough, man, kind of just don't really want to talk about that one, and probably not going to follow her on Facebook.
Yeah.
But I don't hate the person.
Yeah.
And there's that one where you're like, man, if I ever see that motherfucker again, I'm gonna stab that bitch.
And that.
But that one too. So I think there's a little bit of all of that going into everything, and it all has its own little dynamic for its own reason. And I I wish nothing but anyone the best, and I hope that we're able to we'll be a little closer in the future and kind of learn from it all. And obviously, with Andel's health, for people that maybe have seen with going around, that it's certainly a wake up call for a reason to. Did anything any of us do to each other? Was it really that bad at the end of the day to not be friends or not be communicating a little more regularly because, some shit that went down that maybe we weren't in control of necessarily.
Yeah, for people listening, Andel's from Chimera, he's dealing with some health issues, and he has a GoFundMe going right now, where you can contribute and help him out. So I'll probably include a link so people can check that out and help out our buddy. And we really, hope he's doing well and doing better, and hopefully this is going to help him out. On another note, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but kind of in reference to the final breakup, or what? So it was a situation where I think it was Amel left, and then the remaining members of the band all kind of in solidarity decided to move on.
Depends on what side of the story you read, I suppose. Amel sent us an email, and this kind of sounds weird to say. Amel sent us an email, say that fast 10 times, that he was leaving the band, and I was on a flight home. We were coming home from tour, and we were just finishing the tour. I flew home, and other people flew home, so we weren't together. It was like some people rode on the bandwagon back, some people flew from different areas, yada yada. Anyway, long story short, I sent an email to the rest of the group to like, hey, I think it's time to pull the plug, but I asked them politely to hold off because literally I was dealing with a death in my family at the same moment. So I was like, man, when it rains, it pours, you get bad news. So I'm like, I think we should pull the plug, but I want to wait on that. And then for whatever reason.
Before or after Amel's email?
Amel left, then I sent an email.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got you. It was after.
Like, let's pull the plug, but can you hold on before we say anything about it? And then we read online that that everyone left. So I'm not sure what the reason behind that was, or the reason for jumping the gun on something, or making it seem as though they left. If that was like a spiteful tact, I have no idea, because the people I've talked to in the group, with the exception of Amel, it's all been cordial. So yeah. I just don't understand how. Maybe it was miscommunication, but it looks shitty.
Yeah.
Because what it looks like, which they might very well have wanted to quit anyway.
It looks like a mutiny.
Yeah, it looks like a mutiny, but I think it was more like a mutual.
Yeah.
I think I was ready to either put it on hiatus or leave myself. I was before Amel quit, I was on the phone with our lawyer, like, when can I leave? How can I leave? How should I do it?
Yeah.
So I think it was on I think if I'm the quote unquote leader, is probably written all over my face.
So my next question is kind of a two-parter. One, are you difficult to be in a band with? And
probably.
And post and kind of dealing, and if so, or did these confluence of events kind of make you take some kind of look in the mirror in a different way, or in a more deeper way maybe than you hadn't previously?
Sure. I'm not one of those people that's not going to admit that I have my problems. And I think that Chimera 1.0 taught me a lot about that. And I learned from self-introspection and seeing doctors and whatnot. I have what's called hypomania, which is a form of bipolar. And this is long after those guys had quit the band that this was diagnosed, but it doesn't give them a reason, but it explains that my mood can fluctuate pretty easily, and I can be difficult to be around.
Yeah.
I've since learned to control that a lot more. And even back in the day, I would be on medications that would exacerbate those symptoms and didn't realize it. You know, they thought maybe depressed, but in reality, I'm on the other side of the mental health spectrum. So unintentionally, yes. 2.0, I didn't make anyone's life miserable that I know of. I think that people were underpaid, and I think that sucks.
It was more just like the logistical factors of the band maybe winding down and there not being enough economy, and them also not being necessarily tied to the band in the same way on a emotional or sentimental level that they could. It was probably a little easier for them to walk away from something that they weren't quite as invested in.
You'd have to ask them, you know, to get 100% answer on that. But I mean, that was, you know, some of the people that have been forthcoming about what happened usually point towards money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I'm
not gonna throw anyone under the bus, because, you know, that they might have very well, like I said, had a mutiny going on, but there's always something to mutiny that are going to talk about it.
Well, I think all that stuff comes up. Yeah, I think that was a factor. Not necessarily me leaving, God forbid, but definitely us slowing down our touring in kind of the 6 months to a year before the band disbanded, because we literally couldn't really afford to be a full-time band anymore. Like, we weren't bringing enough income. And to me, I was actually okay with that. I was okay with being a part-time band. I think in some ways, I think that can save a band. Like you said, like you were talking about taking that break maybe back in 2010. I think sometimes you have to put the brakes on it and just kind of be honest with where the band is. Because you can be a very successful band that just does a thing here, a thing there, you know, picks your spots and make it fit into your life the way it works for you. Like I think in many ways, when you're doing it as your main job for 10 plus years, you kind of almost begin to think there's only one way to do it, and that doing it otherwise is kind of a diminishment of your standing. And I think it's a tough transition when you kind of like you said, you just get used to it. You're like, this is my life. This is what I do. I go on tour, I make records. And then you hit a point where like, oh, I might have to do something else. And it's a fucking, you know, it's a kick to the nuts if you're kind of wrapped up in it. But in a lot of ways, I think that's a big part of growing up, is just understanding that, you know, you're going to have to do different things, and the world is going to change. And it's just, and at the end, ultimately, it's going to make you a stronger and better person, and more skilled and more diverse. And, you know, so I don't know, like, so, you know, even with my preamble, like, what have you been up to since the band has broken up?
Well, that, you know, like what you said right there nails it on the head. I of course don't wish for any arguments or any negativity within the band that has happened, but those things too lead you to becoming if you're in tune with your feelings and want to become a better person and take those sort of things to heart. I learned a lot about that sort of thing, and basically I switched gears. I felt that maybe the music industry, I needed to walk away from it. I think that maybe I let it wrap my head too much, and I just walked away and did something completely different and became a commercial photographer. So I spend most of my time working with businesses, and I use the same approach, though, like that I learned from music and all this cool stuff I learned from being in a band, and how important it is to have your band set up on the internet correctly. And I mean, I live in a small town in rural Ohio, and the business owners around here don't know anything about the websites. They don't know anything about social media, even just setting up a basic page. And these are things that can help these businesses grow. So I'm like in chamber meetings now, like rubbing elbows with all the local business owners. And I used my photography, and then I'll help them build a website or use that photography for a strong image to sell a product. And I also do the other kind of basic photography, working with children. And I mean, that's funny. Like metalhead tattooed guy going up to do like a baby's first birthday party. It just makes no sense, but at the same time, it makes perfect sense.
Did you go to school
So
for photography or anything? Or are you self-taught?
I'm a little bit of both. I think you know better than most, having toured with me, that I like to spend a lot of my free time watching movies and TV shows. I'm a kind of a cinema geek. So I've always been a fan of cinema and cinematography mainly.
A lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme. That's, you got this guy watches a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme films.
I have a spreadsheet of his spin kicks per movie laid out. I think his Kickboxer was the most, with 17.
Wow. Should forward that.
But yeah, I love movies, and when we were making our documentary for the final Chimera album, Crown of Phantoms, we had 3 cameras, but only 2 dudes. So I picked up a camera and started helping with the filming, and I started shooting pictures while I was doing this. It's like 2012. And all my friends that were pros at the time were kind of encouraging me after seeing the work to, hey, you have a good eye. And all the band guys I took pictures for, Emil and Austin and everyone, they're like, man, these are the best pictures of me ever and stuff like that. So I kind of had this right off the rip, people complimenting me on my capabilities. And I think you and I have kind of discussed, we go down the YouTube rabbit hole quite a bit and come across some of these entrepreneur types. So like Tim Ferriss, he has a pretty interesting method called the DISS method, DISS, I believe, where you're breaking down and you don't really like go after like to try to be the best. Like, my opinion, Stanley Kubrick's the best in photography and filmmaking. And while I do love to,
it's like the 80-20
love to
principle.
Emulate him. Yeah, I do love to emulate him. I can also look at someone like Alex Morgan, who's more my age, doing commercial photography, working with bands, but doing a lot of stuff with businesses in his hometown. That's something more I can kind of reach for and like do my own take on something that. So I learned quite a bit about business from him, and then just develop my own skill through practice and trial and error. And schooling would be strictly through like online courses, Creative Live. I took a bunch of stuff on learning how to edit and composition. YouTube, of course, is a great resource. And then my friends that are in the industry, picking their brain, looking at other photographers' work and from a critical eye point, just like a musician would. What I like about photography, comparatively speaking to music, is I'm able to be more prolific and just really reach out of my quote unquote core fan base. Like I said, I'll work with a baby one day, and then maybe I'm taking pictures of a plate of ribs the next.
Yeah.
And,
the one thing I can relate to that is with me, how I got involved with writing and now doing the podcast, and the contrast to being in a band is photography. You can do it by yourself. You don't,
Correct.
And there's this piece of kind of agency and freedom that, being in a band, when you're literally tied to 4 or 5 other people for a decade plus, and all of a sudden, from a creative standpoint, there's not much you can do without getting going through a lot of filters, being a bunch of people in the band, your manager, your label, and then you have something creatively where you are the beginning and the end, and it's a pretty liberating thing. So I imagine you probably are enjoying some of that as well.
Yeah, I love that aspect, and plus, like I'm an introvert, so editing photography for me is great. I sit at home, I throw a pair of shorts, put on fucking Cobra in the background or some kind of awesome movie like that I've seen a million times.
Tango and Cash.
Yeah, exactly. He thinks he's Rambo.
Rambo is a pussy.
So it's fun. I work from home a lot, and then too with websites is the same thing. It's working from home and being on a computer, and a lot of times I'll work with some friends to help me on the projects that they're kind of working with me, not like a band where we're like arguing over creative things like, oh, I want this riff here, It's more like, hey, edit this way, please, for me really fast. Yeah, sure, no problem, buddy. It's kind of like one of those situations that I have a really good friend in England named Simon. He's kind of been my partner with a lot of web stuff and helps do a lot of the heavy lifting, and I'm more the like Salt Bay with it, like, do that right there and sprinkle that on.
Right on, man. Well, listen, man. Well, it's one thing I can say as someone who's known you for a long time and kind of, I've seen your personality change a lot and like open up and become, a guy who is, I would describe as a pretty dark guy, 10 plus years ago, to someone who's, seems to be a lot more kind of like spiritually aware and optimistic. And it's just as a friend, it's been, even though we don't talk to each other all the time, but when I look at with old friends, and you can go whatever 20 years without seeing each other and you just pick up where you left off. But I'm definitely, it's just nice to see someone evolve in a positive way and kind of discover different parts of themselves. So I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you, man. I'm definitely really thankful that you decided to do this.
I appreciate it, and yeah, I enjoy our friendship. We've had a very long one, and like you said, you can go talking, but it's not like I don't see what you're up to almost every day on Twitter, reading your articles. I think that's really cool. I love that you did the podcast thing. I've been kind of teetering on it for 2-3 years now. Like, do I want to do one? And like, I always like, is it played out by this point? But man, I still listen to podcasts all the time. So you never know. You might see me throw my hat in the ring.
That was our talk with Mr. Mark Hunter, the ex-lead singer for the band Chimera. Got to give him all the thanks in the world. I really enjoyed that conversation. I was so happy I just thought he opened up about a lot of stuff that, maybe a lot of people wouldn't really have the balls to come forward with, so I really hope you guys enjoyed that. That little clip I played was from a song called Save Yourself from the self-titled Chimera release. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're probably a fan of the band. So I figured I'd just get me a little clip because I love when that verse kicks in and man, damn man, feeling that, miss that stuff. But anyway, thank you guys for checking out the show. Actually, before I go, I'm just gonna plug another Jabberjaw Media show. This one is called Manage Mental. And the hosts are Mr. Mike Mowry, who is a manager for Outer Loop Management, works with bands like Periphery and Darkest Hour. And then the other host is Blasco, who's a musician who plays with bands like Ozzy Osbourne and Zach Wilde and Rob Zombie, but he's also a manager of bands like Black Label Society as well as Black Veil Bride. So many blacks. Gets all mumbly jumbly. But anyway, they do a weekly show, and it's cool because it's little hit jobs. It's only about 30 to 40 minutes, and they'll discuss an article or one subject matter relating to the music industry and then give their opinion on it. So one week they'll talk about merchandise, or one week they'll talk about a band getting a lawyer. But I've been checking it out every week, and it's, even for someone like me who's been doing this forever, it's always great to keep educating yourself, because I have a new band and I'm involved in underground music. You cannot hang your hat on what you were doing. It's all about what you're doing now. And because the industry changes so much, it's always helpful to keep filling that brain with knowledge. So great show, Manage Mental, with the Jabberjaw Media Podcast Network. Check it out. And I'll probably keep doing that. I'll check out a different Jabberjaw show every other episode or so and give you guys a recommendation and tell you about it so you can check it out. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. Mamba out.
This is the Jabberjaw Podcast Network.